Well, good afternoon to all of you. I hope you can see and hear me. I can't see and hear you, but I trust that you're out there somewhere. My name's Jim Coyle, and I would like to welcome you to this brief seminar on tips and tricks for Music Course 1. I'm speaking to you from the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, next to the Opera House and Botanical Gardens, and I rather am sitting here in the country of the Gadigal people, and I would like to acknowledge their custodianship of the country and pay my respects to elders past and present. You HSC people are undergoing the most stressful year of your young lives. And added to that, of course, you have the whole COVID situation going on at the moment, and that's really not helping. I will say this, every time I speak to young people, it always makes me feel optimistic. I'm very privileged to spend time with university students and with HSC students, a lot of my work as well. Every time I speak to young people, I feel optimistic. And the current crisis, I think, is going to cause a generation of people, you people, who are going to be supremely resilient and adaptable and community minded. This furnace is tempering the steel within you, and you COVIDistas are going to go on to become one of the greatest of generations. I'm convinced of that. First of all, though, you've got the small matter of the HSC to get through. And can I offer you my 3 tips for success in studying anything at all? Number 1, write stuff down. Write stuff down. The more highly evolved of you will instantly be clutching one of these wonderful engines right now to make notes. Write stuff down. There's more and more research emerging that suggests that the act of writing something down helps to embed that in our understanding. We don't quite know how that works yet, but it seems that it does work. Write stuff down. Second thing, read the question again. It doesn't mean read it twice, it means read it again, read it again. This is particularly true for the listening exam in Music 1. Make sure you understand what the question is asking you and you are answering the question. As a marker, there is nothing more heartbreaking than to read a brilliant response all about the use of texture in a particular question, when in fact the question was asking about pitch, and you're scrambling around trying to find marks to give to this person because that person hasn't read the question properly. Read the question again. Number 3, the most important of all, I think, under the present circumstances, don't panic. Amazingly important advice, easier to say than it is to do. Just don't panic. It's not going to help you. Just try to think clearly. So let's move on to the actual music HSC paper itself. It tends to follow a very, very similar format every year. Every year there are 4 questions, roughly equally weighted. And every year they ask short questions, usually about the concepts of music, based on musical examples that you will not have heard before. Or rather, if by some chance you have heard them before, it is a chance and nothing more. So what I would like to cover this afternoon is what they ask about, the music that they ask about, and how best to approach preparing and answering these questions. So the questions, as I mentioned, are about the concepts of music, and I hope if I start to recite them, you will be able to join in with me. Pitch, duration, dynamics and expressive techniques, structure, texture, tone color. 6. To my way of thinking, it's not the perfect way of describing music. There are problems with it, but this is what we're dealing with. It's also important to remember that there are certain aspects of music that belong in more than one of these categories. For example, if you take a musical device like rallentando, slowing down, because that's slowing down, it's a tempo thing, so it's therefore belongs in duration, but the music is slowing down for some sort of effect, and therefore it could be argued that it is also an expressive technique. And you are free to include something like that in questions about either duration or expressive techniques. Okay, so we do in HSC terms talk about music in terms of the 6 concepts, and the essential skill here is to be able to describe music objectively and accurately. And that's something that hardly any adults can do. Even professional writers, when they're describing music, they say nonsensical things like, this song has got a great beat. Well, in the first instance, it may not be a song. In the second instance, a beat is a beat. I can't see it having qualities of goodness or badness. It is what it is. And so we have to overcome generations of people talking subjective, inaccurate nonsense about music and say clear, precise, objective observations that describe the music rather than our reaction to it. So which concepts do they ask about the most? I've done an analysis of this, and the interesting thing is I analyzed 91 questions that were asked in the HSC Music 1 going back to the mid-1990s, because when you're an academic, you have to do incredibly boring things sometimes. If you look at the numbers, you will see a fairly even distribution. A little bit low for dynamics and expressive techniques, but the other elements of music, the other concepts of music have been asked about on a reasonably even basis. These are the other things, the other keywords that have come up. And this then comes into the category of decoding the questions. We want to write about the concepts of music, but if the question is asking us about unity and contrast are often things that are related to structure, but structure can only be described in terms of the other elements of music. In other words, if you wish to say that the first part is the verse and then there's the chorus and then the verse again and then the chorus again, we can tell it's the chorus, we've heard it before, and its characteristics are that it has a thicker texture and there are more instruments involved and that it is perhaps louder and that it's moved into a major tonality or something like that. So unity and contrast and variety for that matter are questions about structure, and structure is the one of the musical elements that is the one musical element that can only be described in terms of the other 5, okay? Interest here means variety. It means the differences, the contrasts in the music. Whether or not you find it interesting isn't what's being asked here. Okay, so contrast and interest are essentially asking about the same thing. And then the others require a little bit more analytical thought. Tension can be built in terms of building up dynamics with a crescendo, thickening texture, creating dissonant harmonies, and so on and so on. I do need to move on from this to talk about, and this is an under-regarded area really, to talk about the sort of music that comes up in exams. Again, I did an analysis of the types of music they ask about. Just a little disclaimer about that for you to read. Here's the thing. Very nearly half of the questions have been about Western art music. Okay, classical, Baroque, 19th century music, art music of the 20th and 21st centuries, and sometimes early music as well. Okay, world music is up there, various classical and folk styles from civilizations around the world. We as listeners, by and large, as people who love music, have a terrible habit of only loving some music and not really listening to the things that are not our thing. And if there's one takeaway above all others for you this afternoon, it is widen your experience of listening, broaden your mind, broaden your ears, take them as far away from the music that you love as you possibly can. Don't stop listening to the music that you love, but you do need to open your mind, open your ears as far as possible. You don't want to go into the exam and there is an excerpt from Kinder Totenlieder of Mahler and you are shocked because there are no banjos. Don't be that person. Expand your horizons. Listen to music from other civilizations. What does Thai classical music sound like? Listen to music from other eras. What was music like? What was dance music like in the 1500s in Italy? Really try to expand your horizons of the sorts of music that you listen to. If we drill down further into this analysis, these are the what are called the contexts, the topics which you may study for HSC music. And here is a breakdown of those examples from questions. And the spread is remarkable. There's all sorts of things in all sorts of places. Okay, I'm not asking you to love all of this music because the exam isn't about what you think about it. It's not about your opinion. It's about objective and accurate observations about the music. So listen observantly with intelligent ears and ask yourself when you are listening to a Haydn string quartet, perhaps something that you've never listened to before. All right, so we know there are 4 string instruments. What are they? How do their relationships work texturally? What's the sort of harmonic and melodic structure, the pitch organization of this music? How does it work rhythmically? Is it easy to follow a beat, or does the beat sort of wander around it? And all of these kinds of questions. Ask yourself these questions as you expand your listening. Just keeping an eye on the enemy here. This is quite difficult to time this. It's also quite difficult to talk to 61 people when you can't see any of them. I've got no idea if my jokes are landing or anything at all. So moving along, how you answer the question. If you have done a practice exam for music, you so sorry, something just there we are. If you've done a practice exam for music, one of the things I think you will have realized is how quickly the time passes. The amount of time that you have to answer these questions in Music 1 listening exam is very limited. And this is important. You are not writing an essay. And what I'm going to say to you now applies to your music HSC listening paper. It does not apply to any other subject. Okay, so I don't want you to take what I'm about to tell you and apply it to ancient history or to economics or something like that. Otherwise, I'll have a whole bunch of geography teachers burning crosses on my lawn or whatever it is that geography teachers do when they're angry. Do not write an essay in Music 1. Don't do that thing of repeating the question in the first sentence. Don't do the thing of writing a concluding sentence or paragraph. In conclusion, Canada a land of contrast. We don't do any of that. The actual structure of your answer, by and large, is irrelevant. You need to think of your answer as a smash and grab operation. You make your point, you relate it to a concept, and if possible, you identify precisely when and where in the music what you're describing takes place. Okay, so if you've got a question about tone color, for example, you can say, this piece begins with an unaccompanied trumpet playing loudly with a straight mute. Bang. Accurate, relevant to the question, relevant to the concepts, and in this occasion, very easy to identify exactly when and where in the music this takes place. Smash and grab, bang, 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 bang. If you can't remember the name of an instrument, draw it. If you've got a question about structure that is probably best explained by using a diagram, use a diagram as well as writing your answer. If there are sometimes questions which are really effectively answered by a 2-column table. If it's one of those questions that is a compare and contrast type of question, a line down the middle of the page is a massively useful way to say in the left-hand column this, on the right-hand column by contrast that, and you can lay it out very, very, very clearly in that way. So that's what you need to do sometimes, but don't waste your time by the composer's use of tone color in this example is shown by, no. Straight in, bang, 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 smash and grab, smash and grab. I should say something about how this is marked, okay? Because sometimes students ask questions that begin with, do I lose marks for, bad spelling or something like that? The answer is no, because it isn't possible to lose marks. These questions are marked according to a set of criteria, so that they're compared to a description of a 9 out of 9, an 8 out of 9, a 7 out, okay? So that it compared in that way. So they're marked as an overall impression, but the marking is always an additive and not a subtractive process. In other words, when a marker sits down to start marking an answer to a question, that answer has got 0, and the marker's job is to add marks to it. So make it easy for the marker to add things so that the marker can say, oh yes, that's relevant, that's accurate, that points to something that actually happened in the music. Good, thank you, we're on a roll here. The other thing that markers may not do is give half marks. There are no half marks, it's only whole marks. So make sure, if you possibly can, that you get all of the marks that are available. Okay, so we're coming into the period of questions, and I know you've received a message from my colleague, probably Julian, in the chat saying if you've got any questions, write them down. So now's your chance. If you've got any questions, write them down. But to summarize, when you are preparing for this exam, broaden your listening as far as you possibly can. When you answer, make sure you answer what the question is actually asking you. It may be an idea to circle the words in the question that relate to concepts, for example. And when you answer the question, smash and grab, relevant, accurate, and pointing to something in the music. Okay, I am going to see if there are any questions.
We have one for you, Jim.
Yes, Julian.
There's a question that says, regarding performance, what do markers look for, and should you consider more technically complex pieces to get the best marks?
That's a really, really good question. And I don't want to commit myself fully to this because my experience with HSC music is very long and very broad, but the one area where my expertise is weakest, in fact, is in performance. I have seen people take on pieces that are too technically challenging and fallen down. It's better to play something that's perhaps not quite so technically difficult, but to play it brilliantly than to overstretch yourself with something that you do the thing that you play the first 8, 9, 10 bars extremely well, and then you stub your toe on bar 11 because that's as far as you can get at this tempo. Don't be that person.
Thanks, Jim. Anyone else has questions, feel free to enter them into the Q&A box. Don't be shy. Here's one. Any tips for Viva Voces?
Yes. Good question. Tips for Viva Voces. There's a whole bunch of, and I don't like to be negative, but there's a whole bunch of do not do's for Viva Voces. Don't talk over your musical examples. Don't fail to have your musical examples queued up, right? Don't be the person who gets let down by the technology not working. If you're faffing around with a YouTube clip trying to find the right place for your musical example for Viva Voce, you have done it wrong. You need to have all of your clips cut out on Audacity and something like that and ready to go. Viva Voces are not prepared speeches. You have to answer the questions that the examiners give you, but you do need to have in your mind what you would say if you were allowed free rein to say anything you like, if you see what I mean. And also talk about the music. Talk about the music. Don't do the one that says, oh yeah, I'm doing one about Ricky and the Dead Goods, and the band was formed in 1975 when, you know, Ricky Jones and his brother Billy was playing the drums, and then his brother died and they got Sarah Wang to play the drums and blah. Nobody cares about that stuff. Talk about the music is the most important thing. Prepared to talk about the music. Be prepared, just like in the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. We got any more questions?
Yeah, a couple more for you.
Yep.
Is there a structure that you think is best for responses?
No, it depends on the question. It depends on the question. But like I say, smash and grab, which is inherently unstructured, but you make your point, you keep it relevant, and you relate it to something in the music. That's an interesting question, though. I don't think you've got time for structure. If you're structuring an answer, you're thinking far more clearly than I ever could in that circumstance.
A couple questions on compositions. So
Yep.
what are your top recommendations for composition and how are they marked?
Okay, so interestingly, with Music 1, you get a 4-minute composition, as opposed to Music 2, they only get 2 minutes, and 4 minutes is a bit easier, I think. I strongly advise you to get ahead with your composition. Your compositions should be well advanced by now, if not virtually finished, okay? Collaborate, or at least ask people who play the instruments for which you're writing. So if you're writing piano music and you're not a pianist, get a friend who is a pianist to play it for you and to talk about what works, what doesn't work with the composition. I spend an awful lot of my time looking at year 12 compositions and giving people feedback and help with them. I spend a lot of my time actually teaching teachers about teaching composition. So it's difficult for me to give a really, really short answer. You need to plan your composition, however. You need to know how your piece is going to begin and continue and end before you start putting it on the computer, onto Noteflight or Sibelius or whatever you're using. The people who compose by starting at bar 1 and then doing until the bell goes, and then next time they pick up at that place and do some more and stuff like that, those compositions are never successful. You need to plan your structure. You need to know exactly how it's going to begin and continue and end before you get anywhere near a computer.
Thanks, Jim. They're pouring in now.
Because we've got about 1 minute.
Talk fast. Does it matter if your smash and grab points don't connect?
Better if they do, not particularly if they don't.
Great. Should we be filling the entire space given for writing in the oral exam? If
you feel the need to, yes. But if you've said everything, I've seen people who haven't filled half the space, who've still got full marks for a question. It's about the quality of what you write.
That's good. How would you advise we remember musical techniques for analysis? For example, remembering the Italian words or more complex terms?
Okay, one thing about the Italian words can be useful if there's no English equivalent, but you don't have to use Italian words. If you can't remember the word staccato, then the word short notes is perfect, or 2 words, is perfectly adequate. Staccato is better because it's only 1 word. So look, remember these things by doing them, by playing them, by using those words in your everyday conversation. I think that's how to do it. But don't be afraid of saying something in plain English if you can't remember the fancy way of doing it. That's fine.
Great. When you state a technique you heard, how do you refer to, sorry, I'm just trying to, give me 1 second. How do you refer to where you heard about it in the piece? I think the question is about how you refer.
Right, yeah, okay. So sometimes it's obvious, it's at the beginning, it's at the end. Other times you have to vague out a little bit and say towards the end, or about halfway through, or in the first part of the piece, or something like that. There's no expectation that you're sitting there with a stopwatch going, oh, it's 4 minutes and 8 seconds in. So you sometimes need to vague out a little bit. It was a good question though.
Yeah. How do you approach a piece that the student is familiar with, but the teacher isn't? For example, pieces from a music from another culture used as our topic in Viva Voce, or performances like Indian classical music.
Right, this is one of those situations where the teacher really needs to acknowledge that the student knows more. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. And that's one of those situations where the student needs to lead the learning, which your year 12 people, you're very, very nearly adults. You can cope with that. And I hope your teacher is very nearly an adult as well, and your teacher can cope with that too.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for learning different structure forms?
Yeah, look, let's not confuse structure and form. Form is a subset of structure. Form, things like ternary, rondo, binary, refer very specifically often to dance forms from the classical period. Structure simply means how the music is put together in terms of how ideas are repeated and how ideas are developed. So if you're thinking about structure as form, you've got too narrow an idea of what structure actually is. Ask yourself this question: have I heard this bit before, or something like it before? And that way you're asking yourself a question about structure. Gillian, we're going to have to take maybe one more question because we have.
There's only one left, so we're running out of time. Yeah. Do you have any specific recommendations for drummers in performance?
Yeah, it's difficult this year. I was going to say show off your ensemble skills, but of course that's going to be really, really hard. One thing about drummers that personally I always admire the drummers who stay off their snare drum. If everything has got a very heavy 2 and 4 on the snare drum, everything tends to sound somewhat the same. So if you can find Latin pieces or jazz pieces or world music pieces that avoid that really heavy backbeat the whole time, you're going to show a variety of styles and a variety of musical interpretation, which is going to make you stand out from the hundreds, literally hundreds of other drummers that there are doing this. That's I think the secret to having a superior point of difference as a drummer in this situation.
That was it. All the questions answered.
All right, thank you. Listen, all 56 of you, thank you so much for dropping in. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope that sometime in the future we can actually have a conversation face to face and maybe even do some musical stuff. Would be great.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.